Kia ora koutou, everyone. Please remain standing for a moment of prayer or silent reflection. Please take a seat. Kia ora, everyone, and welcome to this meeting, the final meeting of the Hutt City Council for the 2019-2022 triennium, and it is great to have you all here. Can I just point out the emergency procedures on the screen, which we'll all be well aware of. Please take a moment to read them. If I can ask your mobile phones are switched on silent, that is greatly appreciated. We do have councillors Barrett and Milne who are attending the meeting via Zoom. Councillors, if you could please make sure you use the virtual hand function if you wish to ask a question or participate, and we will keep an eye on things from there. If you could make sure that your camera is turned on at all times, but that you are on mute when not speaking. Thank you very much. So we'll move through to the opening karakia. Please feel free to join me. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai, e he aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Next item on the agenda, if we could all please stand for a moment of silence for the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. Thank you. And just to acknowledge the state service that we had last week, that I was fortunate to attend on behalf of the council, and I know that there has been good uptake for the condolence books that have been spread across our libraries and facilities. So just an acknowledgement on, certainly on behalf of the people of Lower Hutt, for the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. Moving through to apologies, item 3. So we do have apologies from Deputy Mayor Lewis and Councillor Brown. So I'd like to move that the apologies for both these councillors be accepted. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Briggs. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. I declare that carried. We do have a minor item not on the agenda. So I have received a request from Aotearoa 350 to make a presentation at this meeting. Pursuant to Standing Order 10.13, the presentation will be included in the agenda as a minor item. Furthermore, pursuant to Standing Order 10.4, this matter will be presented after public comment. Do we need to move that? No. So we will do that. So moving through to public comment, which I believe we have Matt Young speaking to item 9, which is a submission on the proposed regional policy statement, change 1. Matt, welcome. So Matt, as you know, of course, you've got 3 minutes, and we'll then see if there's any time for questions within that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. As the Mayor has said, I'm speaking to the Hutt City's proposed submission to the regional policy statement, change 1. And my interest in this policy statement comes primarily through the Riverlink Environment Court consent process. And through that, I've, I guess, been fortunate to see how the operative RPS has been applied in practice, both by a planner acting on your behalf and the Environment Court. And that process has sort of demonstrated to me that the existing operative RPS is quite weak in climate terms, which is unsurprising. It's from 2013, it did need an update. And so I've been really excited to see proposed change 1 progress through Greater Wellington. Quite frankly, it's probably been the single item which has made me most hopeful for the future from this entire triennium. So I've been really glad to see that happen. And I've read the Section 32 report, and my understanding of the proposed change is really positive. I think what Greater Wellington regional council is trying to do is really admirable. It aligns with the climate emergency that they've declared and which you've declared. So I guess my general feedback on Hutt City's submission is that it's quite oppositional. There are a lot of statements which oppose provisions in change one, and there's not a lot of commentary which acknowledges that the planning system absolutely has to play a role in responding to the climate crisis, and there's not a lot of commentary which acknowledges that you've declared a climate emergency as well, and you're really committed as a council, and our city as a community are committed to responding to that. So as a general comment, I'd like to see more of that sort of focus reflected in the submission. And I acknowledge that there are some big changes in change one, and the submission is quite detailed, and I don't have time to go through all the provisions, but just a couple that I would pick out is there's a new climate change chapter proposed in the RPS, and policies CC.1 and CC.9 are sort of a pair of fraternal policies that talk about the importance of new transport infrastructure, achieving mode shifts, achieving emissions reductions, optimizing overall travel demand. CC1 is directive to plans, district plans, regional plans, and CC9 is a consideration on designations, resource consents, etc. My view is that those are really exciting. I think you should want those provisions in the RPS so that when the new council, whatever that looks like, comes back in the next triennium, they will get a report from officers that says, how can our district plan best achieve these outcomes? You should want it so that when major transport projects advance in our city in the future, that they have to consider mode shift and deliver on mode shift. Without these things, we will fail our climate targets. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Is there any questions? Members? Okay, Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Matt. So you've touched on those 2 points. Was there any other point you were about to get to that you think we should have specific consideration of that you haven't had time to cover?
Yes, I think probably the one major thing I would say is around officers have put a lot of commentary around the plan having applying consideration directly to resource consents rather than at the plan level. I'm not a planning expert, so I can't offer the full picture on that, but it is a recurring feature of the RPS, so I would suggest it's not an error on Greater Wellington's part. There is a reason for that. And I would just implore you to be really careful to ensure that if Hutt City makes a submission which opposes consideration directly on resource consents, that doesn't preclude these sorts of considerations from being considered in large transport projects in the future, which is really where things like policy CC.9, policy 57 absolutely need to apply. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. Okay, so moving through to the minor item not on the agenda which I mentioned, which is the presentation on Aotearoa 350, Pōneki's homegrown energy campaign. Kia ora and welcome, Marcus Newton House, and I will pass it over to you. You've got a presentation in front of us. And Marcus, you have 5 minutes, and we'll then see if there's questions within that as well. Thanks.
That looks like the right button. So, tēnā koutou katoa, good morning all. Hi, nice to see you. Thanks for the invite. My name is Marcus, and I'm a member of the Pōneki branch of the climate action organisation Aotearoa 350, which itself is part of the global climate justice movement 350.org. We have requested, well, I'll better get my little clicker going here. We've requested the opportunity to speak with you today in order to present our current homegrown energy campaign. And the central idea is very simple. It's an easy win in supporting a fast and just transition to 100% renewable electricity, and will be of significantly more benefit to the people of the Hutt than the costs that are sunk into it. In other words, this is an idea that will yield excellent bang for your buck, and it will do so in line with strong community and environmental principles. Little background, climate change is a very real threat to the people and environment of the world, of Aotearoa and of the Hutt. The most recent report coming from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has this to say. One, it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean and land. Two, there is high confidence that sea levels will continue to rise even beyond 2100. Three, limiting human activities that cause global warming, such as fossil fuel use, will reduce risks to marine biodiversity, fisheries and ecosystems, and their ability to provide services to humans. Four, climate-related risks to health, livelihoods, food security, water supply, human security and economic growth are projected to increase with a global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and increase even further with a 2 degrees Celsius increase. And five, pathways limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius with no or limited overshoot would require rapid and far-reaching transitions in energy, also in land, urban and infrastructure use. Now, there are two main ways organisations like councils need to think about tackling climate change. First, obviously, the effects of it have already started, so mitigation activities obviously needed. And second, they do need to stop being part of the problem, start being part of the solution. You need to stop activities exacerbate climate change and start activities that ameliorate it, for example, moving from fossil fuels to clean energy use. Aotearoa 350 Poineki's homegrown energy campaign arose on reflection of two things. The need to convert fossil fuel use to clean energy use, and the fact that electricity generation situation in Aotearoa, whilst on the surface of it seeming pretty good, we do get around 80.5% of our power from renewable sources, and the government's looking to go to 100%. But unfortunately, it's fairly broken in a few ways. There are barriers to Aotearoa being able to increase clean green power generation that come down to the way the industry is structured, regulations governing the way energy projects are consented. Actually, the second stage of our campaign is in fact lobbying central government to make common sense changes to this legislation, but there is much that can be done straight away. And of course, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that energy poverty is a very real thing in Aotearoa. In the last 30 years, household power prices have risen by 79%, and more than 100,000 households are spending over 10% of their income on power and live in energy hardship. Now, one workable solution with today's technology, requiring comparatively little initial outlay or ongoing maintenance that sets clean, green and community focused as sort of new normals, and would be a great example of councils leading by example with regards to climate change, is our current campaign ask, distributed energy generation. Now, this means generating energy at a local or community level, for example, by putting PV cells on the roofs of all Hutt City Council-owned buildings. Space is right there, waiting to be used. Doing this lessens your reliance on expensive, dirty power, which saves the council money. It helps you meet environmental policy targets and builds community rapport. We feel it would be a positive step for all city councils in the Wellington region, including the Hutt City Council too. One, commit to studying feasibility with an eye to publicly endorsing a distributed energy generation policy, ideally by June next year. Two, publicly announcing by June next year the council's plan to have all its buildings running on locally produced green-sourced electricity. And three, moving ahead with getting the policies and finance in place so the PV cells can start being erected on council building roofs shortly thereafter. Now, obviously, there are many ways of generating clean green energy, but photovoltaic cell technology has come along a lot in recent years, and there's an awful lot of space ready for them to be erected, waiting on your tops of your buildings. So PV cells could easily become the backbone of a locally generated energy generation scheme. So yeah, thanks for listening to our presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Any questions from members? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you for your presentation and your suggestion that our council show some leadership on this, and I agree it's a good way of looking at our energy supply in the future. Our council is currently reviewing its district plan, so on top of what our council can do ourselves with our own rooftops and PV cells, what are some important steps our council can take to enable this kind of generation and distribution to be easier across our whole city?
Good question. I think it would need some experts to look at, what are the intricacies of putting such a plan into place. It seems to me that the first stages would be what spaces do you have for erecting clean green electricity generation? Is it just going to be PV cells? Do you want to put up windmills, whatever, geothermal? And obviously looking at the cost analysis, how much is the initial outlay? To start with, PV cells weren't expected to last 30 years, and probably the last 5 wouldn't have been that great usage, but now they've extended the lifetimes of them. So the initial outlay doesn't seem quite so bad. So there's a bit of a cost analysis there. But of course, you need to analyse the climate implications as well. This is just a drop in the bucket, but once it becomes a new normal, then maybe, and once we got, some common sense legislation changes made, then we can start, having microgrids around the Hutt where little communities get together and they put PV cells on their roofs. And, I'm not using power right now, so I'll, give my power to Fred down the road. And then Fred's less reliant on dirty power, which at the moment, the gen tailors are not really incentivized to put clean green energy projects in place, but just because of the structure of the power system. So once we've, hopefully successfully lobby the government to make a few common sense changes, then this kind of initial thing that we envisage all the councils in Wellington doing could hopefully lead to something bigger and better. I don't know if that entirely answers your question, but it's riffing there.
Go, Councillor Briggs, then Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Just a couple of questions around the other advocacy piece you're doing as well as a national organisation. And so with the Pōneke branch doing the councils in the region, are the other councils in the country having their local branches of 350 engaging them as well in a similar ask? Is that the intention?
Excellent question. Similar but not identical. So we do have a push on at the moment to get sort of clean energy as a way to take over from dirty energy. This is the Pōneke, Wellington branch's idea. And all the other branches of Aotearoa 350 around the country have got their own little campaigns. So yeah, they're trying to tackle it in their own ways, whatever seems best for them for their particular situation, I think.
Great, and if I may just follow up around any kind of advocacy with central government, particularly what comes to mind for me is Kainga Ora. So Kainga Ora is our largest landlord in our city. Obviously, that's a whole lot of roof space that's scattered around in different areas of our communities. So interested to know if there's any partnership there already or something that you would be interested in pursuing.
Absolutely be interested in pursuing. I think ideally you'd want to put that question to Alva, who is one of we've got a couple of people who are full-time working for Aotearoa 350, so she'll be up on the know with all that kind of thing. I'm sorry, I'm not too au fait with it. Missed a few meetings recently, been very busy. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Shaw.
Thanks for the presentation, Marcus. You made a statement that we should be using local renewable energy for the running of every council-owned building by June 23. Is that a target that we should be working towards, or do you really think we can achieve it in that very short time frame?
I don't think the intent is that June rolls around and, oh my word, they don't have PV cells on their roofs yet. What's going on? No, I think it's more a case of we hope that, whoever's presumably once, whoever in after this election, got climate change in their portfolio, would meet together with other people, community partners or other people in the council who've got expertise in the area, and they would have a meeting and discuss, what are the next steps? Is this feasible? What are the costs involved? And then by June, we hope that you'll be in a position to say, yeah, actually we can go ahead with this, and then work towards making it a reality sometime shortly thereafter.
Thank you for that, Marcus. I think it's really appropriate that you're here to speak on this at our last council meeting, so thank you.
Final one, Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. Interesting stuff. Just following up on Councillor Mitchell's point, we've had the first cut, at least the first cut, in our district plan review at home energy or local energy generation chapter from memory. Has Aotearoa 350 thought of, and councils are always reviewing their district plan, has Aotearoa 350 thought of looking for what might be best practice in a planning sense, a permissive planning sense that, enables these kinds of local energy generation things and working with councils on spreading that best practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Personally, I think that's a great little thing for us to be doing, but there is a limited amount of time. We're all volunteers. Some of us have got previous expertise in dealing with government, but a lot of us don't. So I believe the answer to your question is no. I don't think we've actually looked into, what would be the steps in planning, so we can present you a sort of a roadmap. I think it would be nice if we did that actually, but I'm hoping there are people, if you like what we're saying, who can get together, work out what that roadmap would be, for yourselves, instead of having us sort of impose it on you or whatever. Just trying to be honest here. So.
Thank you very much, Marcus. We really appreciate the presentation, and it's good food for thought, particularly as we get beyond Saturday with the new council and certainly reporting that through and getting them thinking and communicating. Yep.
Yeah, no problems. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Marcus. Okay, moving through to item 5, which is the mayoral statement. So as this is our last meeting of the triennium, I'd like to start with some reflections, some of the highlights and some of the challenges that we have faced as a council. But firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of you in this room and within the wider council for your contribution over this term and for all of the collective efforts. It really has been greatly appreciated. That has been a real privilege to serve as Mayor of Lower Hutt. And I think that we are a council over the past 3 years that has been focused on getting the basics right for our city. And we should be incredibly proud of all that we've been able to achieve over the past 3 years and build on that moving forward for whatever the new council looks like. Over the past term, we've delivered on some important projects and strengthened our crucial partnerships with mana whenua and across government, which has helped secure record investment from the Crown as well. To name a few, the Eastern Bay Shared Path, $15 million in co-funding from the Crown, working alongside the Eastbourne Community Board, the local community, to secure that funding. Nainai Pool, $27 million in co-funding from the Crown, another great result for that project, which is trucking along and all going to plan. The Malleen Interchange, of course, collectively, we say this is a reason why it's great to have two very strong local MPs battering heads on that, but we were able to secure funding for that project, not just once, but twice, and being able to get consent granted, of course, with the whole Riverlink project, and work will start in a matter of months. So that is a game changer for our city and will be key in the next term. Some of the smaller things, but also important, is the likes of increasing the EV charging stations across the city, $370,000 in co-funding from the government's low emission vehicles contestable fund. And the big one is that, as we're all aware, we're in the final stages of negotiations with government on the infrastructure acceleration fund for stormwater and wastewater upgrades on the valley floor to help really unlock the potential of Riverlink, up to $98 million from the Crown. And that will be a big one for the council, for the new council, if we're able to be successful in that space. I do truly believe that we've only been able to achieve this level of co-funding and support and making progress because we do have our priorities straight. We are clear as a council. We've shown that we're serious about tackling the challenges our city faces and turning under decades of underinvestment around and planning for growth that we're experiencing, and also fronting up to the climate crisis and lowering our emissions and planning for the impacts of climate change. This has been possible by developing a long-term plan and acknowledging again the staff efforts behind that long-term plan to be able to be upfront and honest with our residents about those challenges and what it needs to happen to overcome them. Without this approach, I don't think we would have been able to secure or build on what we've been able to do in the last wee while. One of the other things I'm really proud of this term is becoming an accredited living wage employer, the third council in New Zealand to do so. This was on top of adopting a new approach to procurement to achieve wider local social and environmental outcomes through our contracts and council projects by sourcing local materials and products. Again, outstanding efforts by our council officials led by Joe Miller. We made strong progress in fulfilling our obligations to our environment by establishing the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee, adopting Council's first carbon reduction plan, and developing a citywide roadmap to decrease emissions. We implemented, of course, a new rubbish and recycling service, which we're all well aware of, and it is a service that is cheaper for 80% of our residents, more efficient, and most importantly, will extend the life of Silverstream landfill and is already seeing good results. But of course, the battle isn't over there in regards to having a more sustainable future and sending less to landfill as much as we possibly can. We also did promise to put transparency at the centre of what we do, and in these meetings themselves, we've actually slashed the amount of public excluded agenda items significantly from previous terms. And when we have had to have public excluded agenda items, we've released the information as soon as practically possible in a proactive way. Again, an approach that I think has served us incredibly well. And when it comes to that water investment, we know that we have looked to front up to that, but we'll continue to have challenges over the coming years as we work through reform as well. Alongside all of this, there was this thing called COVID. I'm not sure if anyone noticed, but the impact on our people and our businesses has obviously dominated this term. Literally, just about the entire term, we've had to deal with a global pandemic while also getting on with the important work of our city. And it's easy to forget the impact that has, not just on organisations, on businesses, on families, on the city, but it absolutely has had an impact on us as a country and as a world, and we've been part of that. And I just want to acknowledge again the response, the leadership from each and every one of you. I think as a council we've operated in a really good way on that space, and also the council team in supporting our community through that process. We also have, of course, government reforms like the changes required to our district plan around housing intensification. That is going to no doubt be a significant issue at the next general election, and we've made clear our opposition to that approach in regards to blanket intensification. But certainly for me, the biggest thing moving forward into the next term for the new council is our changing climate and the winter that we've experienced. 6 weeks of record rain, creating all sorts of issues and problems in our city that probably weren't as front of mind until you literally are experiencing and seeing them every single day. And it really hit home for me that we really probably do not appreciate the daily impact our changing climate will have. And that is something that we need to put in everything that we do moving forward as well. So there are some challenges, but also some great opportunities for the new council that will be taking office in the coming weeks. And certainly I know we can all wish them, whoever they are, all the best of luck in doing that for the benefit of all of our city. Finally, I'd just like to acknowledge Councillors Milne, Sutton and Hislop, who aren't seeking re-election at this election, for your service and contribution, respectively, and also our community board members, Pam Hanna, Virginia Horrocks, Terry Stallworth and Dawn McKinley, for their collective contributions at the grassroots on our community boards, and also those members of our community panels as well, in a different function, but an important one as well over the past term. So on that, I'd just like to pass it over to the Chief Executive for her statement.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you, Mayor Barry and members, for an opportunity to address you at this final meeting of the triennium. On behalf of all of the staff at the City Council, I'd like to thank you all for your service and work to support Te Awa Karangi ki Tailoa Hutt to become a city where everybody can thrive. You'll have noticed that our staff are working hard to promote local body elections. We're very pleased with the number of people who attended the council candidate korero and the mayoral debate in person and online on the 12th of September. Had very, very strong feedback about the quality and professionalism of that event from mayoral candidates and councillor candidates present. And I think that whole korero type situation is something that perhaps we can build into our future engagement models with the new council. Of course, organising opportunities for the community to meet candidates is an important part of my role as Chief Executive in the lead up to an election to facilitate and foster voter participation, which is a legal responsibility that I have. You will have seen the new Be a Voter banners around the city. They're in English and Te Reo. And I hope that's increased the visibility of the elections around the city. Obviously, 11,000 people have voted so far. We'd like more people to vote. You'll see that there are voting bins in libraries and in other community facilities in Queensgate, and these have been accessed by members of the public who are wishing to cast their vote. And we've also got assistance from our electoral officers here at Langs Road, Walton Ash, Koronui Stokes Valley Community Hub and Wainuia Mata Library. We'll evaluate all of our activity this year and other activities to inform our future approach. So it's not just that we'll do it now, we will try and understand the impact of that and what we do for the future. So just want to acknowledge all of you for your service. And finally, I want to acknowledge all of our staff and contract partners, John, you and your team, who have worked, I know, day and night, every day, every night. Our contractors at Fulton Hogan have just been phenomenal in relation to the slips impacting Eastern Hutt Road and others around the city. As you mentioned, Mayor Barry, there's much more work to do, not just to enable that road to be fully open, but to ensure the future resilience of that and the rest of our city. And that means we also need to think about how we work on a staffing level, because we are literally having people throughout that winter working hours that are not really sustainable in a world where disrupted climate is going to be the norm. So huge acknowledgement to John and the team and to Derek and others for their outstanding work as we have experienced what I've referred to as biblical rain over the last few months. And you'll know that we now have until the end of February to get in our application for the first tranche of Better Off funding, which we will look at focusing on resilience. Ngā mihi nui.
Kia ora, Joe. And just to further on that, recognise, John, all of the team and efforts. It's absolutely incredible, and also an acknowledgement to our community who have been obviously disrupted, particularly our Stokes Valley community over the last 8 weeks, and the disruption that's been caused there for their patience and ongoing patience as we resolve that and work together on solutions. But that certainly has been greatly appreciated, and I know that resources have been stretched right across the region. So thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Moving through to conflict of interest declarations. Does any member have a conflict of interest to declare? No. Moving through to committee minutes with recommended items. This is item A, which is the traffic subcommittee from the 1st of September on page 10 of the agenda. I'd like to invite Councillor Dyer to move the adoption of the minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that the minutes of the Traffic Subcommittee meeting held on the 1st of September, pages 10 through to 21 of our agenda, with the exception of items 5A and 5B, be adopted.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Shaw. Any comment? Yep.
No, not from this one. It's pretty straightforward. Yep.
Any discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against no. Declare that carried.
Cool. I'd like to move item 5A, which was the Groundsale Crescent traffic management proposed speed cushions along Groundsale Crescent. The recommendations are on page 12. I'd like to move that recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mitchell. Any comment?
Probably just one small comment on this. There was quite a lot of overwhelming feedback from residents to actually just close the slip road entirely rather than putting speed humps through there. But it is an NZTA owned road, and they are obviously doing a full review at the moment of State Highway 2, so it'll be something that will be looked at in the future.
Great, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against no, declare that carried.
I'd like to move item 5B, which is on page 13 of the agenda, which was the ad hoc bus stop configuration review. The actual recommendations are on page 14. I won't read through them all, but there's 1 through 7 there on page 14.
Seconder? Councillor Mitchell? Any discussion?
No.
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against no, declare that carried. Thank you, Councillor Dyer. Audit and Risk Subcommittee from the 28th of September. So I will cover this. It's the Hutt City Council Group Annual Report on page 2 of the supplementary agenda. Is there any questions? No? Okay, so I will move the recommendations on page 2 of the supplementary agenda, which is A, B and C. So the Council endorses the adoption of the Group Annual Report for the year ended 30th of June 2022, subject to a satisfactory resolution of the following outstanding items, which is A, B and C. I have a seconder for that. Councillor Edwards, any discussion? Councillor Dyer?
Thank you. Obviously, I'm not on the Audit and Risk Subcommittee, so I did have a few comments on this. There's been a lot of commentary around the non-financial KPIs, and I think with the exception of all the water issues that we know about and the changes to our curbside collection, that every single KPI that has not been met in there is linked to COVID, either directly or indirectly. Obviously, some are more obvious, things like our pool attendance numbers down, library numbers down, visitors to our hubs. But there's also a lot of indirect effect that COVID has had in terms of resource consents and staffing numbers and staff working from home. So I just think we really can't understate just how much impact COVID has had, not just for us as an organisation within Lower Hutt, but everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Dyer. And I think adding to that, this talking to colleagues around the region and the country, most councils are in the exact same boat. Yeah. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay, moving through to item 9, which is miscellaneous submission on proposed regional policy statement change 1. This is on page 31 of the agenda. So we do have the team coming up. Stephen, you're going to lead this one. And also, if you could maybe address some of the comments or suggestions made by Matt Young in public comment. Thanks.
Thank you. So just general notes first. We've prepared this draft submission based on the direction we've had from elected members in the past and our expectation that you would be broadly in support of the overall direction of the regional council's push to do more about climate change, natural hazards and so forth. The bulk of the submission certainly does read as opposition to it because while the council is likely to support the overall direction of the plan change, there are a number of significant issues with how it's actually put together in a technical sense, how much of it can actually be implemented by local government in general and by city councils in particular, and what actually the regional council has the ability to do through the resource management system as opposed to through other tools. We didn't note in the submission about council's declaration of a climate emergency, and that's something we could add if council is interested in stressing that. And I would also note in terms of the public engagement, the RPS, like any plan change that we would make to our own district plan, is open to anyone in the public to make their own submissions. So the submission we've prepared focuses solely on those issues where we think it impacts Hutt City Council specifically, as opposed to sort of broader issues about how it will affect the region. It's open to the council to take a broader view of the regional policy statement to change if it wants. One key issue behind perhaps more of the points in the submission than any other is about where assessment is done and when assessment is done. In a lot of cases, certainly in the past, there's been a problem in the resource management system of every level leaving decisions up till later, and then that means that they all only finally get done in resource consents, and every resource consent relitigates the issues from scratch every time and comes to a different outcome that's not an integrated whole. Better planning practice and what local authorities around the country have tried to do in the last decade or more, is to try and do as much of that assessment once at plan making stage rather than leaving it to individual resource consent decisions to make potentially inconsistent calls on that. Were there any other questions either in general or about Mr. Young's public comment?
Great. I think, I mean, I didn't take away that, the public comment was opposed to what we were saying, but it was just, I suppose, in regards to the tone, particularly in the introductory remarks. So I think if we could take that away and look to reflect some of those comments, because I didn't disagree with, and I think it's kind of here, it's just probably could be reflected slightly better. But I don't want to try and wordsmith that by committee. So any other comments or suggestions? Councillor Dyer, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Briggs?
Yeah, one's just on Matt Young's submission. One thing he did raise was not opposing the CCC point 1 policy. Did you have any thoughts around that?
So our concerns there were about how much of those outcomes can be influenced through the resource management system. The RPS directs that objective to be implemented a number of ways, also through the Regional Land Transport Plan, which we think is the main way of driving positive outcomes for transport projects. By the time it gets to a resource consent or a notice of requirement, the overall form of a proposal is generally locked in, including obviously which mode it is. A resource consent decision could approve a new expressway or it could decline a new expressway. It can't say that an expressway should be a rail line, for example. There is some ability to drive mode shift through the detailed design of a project, but again, that's best done earlier in the process and through the direction that the Regional Land Transport sets, rather than trying to reassess those sort of more core features of what a project actually is fairly late in the piece.
I guess for me, one infrastructure project that does come to mind would be the Cross Valley connection. If this was in here, it would send a really strong message that does need, we're obviously, this current council agrees it needs to be multimodal in the future, and public transport and cycle connections on there, but future councils of both Regional Council and Hutt City Council may not agree with that. So I think the intent of having that policy in there is for the large infrastructure projects to actually have some consideration for getting people out of cars and into other modes.
Yes, again, our opinion is generally that for the most part, those sort of decisions about what an infrastructure project actually, what form it takes, are largely set by the time it gets to a resource consent. It does kind of need to be designed from the start about whether it is a multimodal project, whether it is just for driving, whether it is just for public transport, or so on. There's relatively limited scope to change through the resource consent some of those big picture things about what an infrastructure project covers.
Sorry, one more. Isn't the intent though that if you knew you couldn't get resource consent for just putting through a 4-lane highway for Cross Valley connection, that you would then have to design it up front to have those connections? If you don't have the requirement at the resource consent stage, then you may not consider it.
That's another option. I don't think the policy as written would be strong enough to basically do blanket decline any resource consent for new roading infrastructure that was, monomodal. It's an option to propose, I guess, an alternative policy that would discourage things like an expressway only Cross Valley link if council wanted the regional council to direct future councils not to pursue an approach like that.
Councillor Edwards?
Yeah, look, mine was a similar line of questioning. Mr. Young was saying that he was viewing this topic through the lens of Riverlink and his experiences with what he considered was insufficient provision for mode shift in that project. And he was concerned that for big transport projects, the approach that our submission takes might rule out the RPS sort of putting some pressure on at resource consent stage for provision to be made for mode shift. But my reading of it, it seemed to be that there was a threshold set, and if the impacts, the transport aspects of it were more than minor, then the RPS would apply at that large, a large project consent stage. Am I reading it wrong?
So that was policy CC1 you were asking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I think the issue with that policy is that it's about changing the detailed design of a project, which is roughly what the resource consent system has the ability to do at that stage. Again, it's possible to have probably a stronger worded policy that would actually allow projects with insufficient design for mode shift to be declined. But that's not what the Regional Council's proposed. It would be an option for us to take a different approach in the submission to ask for, again, for a stronger policy that would allow those of the resource consents to be declined, which would, again, provide that threat that infrastructure providers would not design something like that and ask for consent in the first place.
Well, not declined, but if it gets to resource consent stage and whoever, the hearing panel or whoever's hearing it says, you know, there's not enough provision here for mode shift, we're going to impose some conditions so that that occurs. I mean, this is exactly what happened with Riverlink, in my understanding. There's nothing in our submission that blocks that approach. We're not arguing against that approach.
In the draft submission, no, there's nothing that would affect that. It's also open to the council to put it in the district plan about what it wants to be considered in that sort of situation, or again to submit for the regional council asking for direction that would be strong enough to ask for substantial changes, which involve to the extent of going back and redesigning part of a project.
Thank you. And just can I do one more question? And it's perhaps a strange one, especially as I admire GWRC's ambition and I want to see mode shift actually, but talk of maximising mode shift. How literally do you take words like that when it's in a regional policy statement? Because if you were to maximise mode shift on, say, the Cross Valley Link, you would ban private cars. That would maximise mode shift. How literally do you have to take a word like that when it's in a high-level document like a regional policy statement?
I think there's a level of absolute literalness that you wouldn't be reaching. It would be to the extent it's practical and to the extent it actually meets the the overall policies and objectives of the plan and the overall goals of what is being proposed. That said, it's still reasonably directive. It's not a question about the direction it's going for. It's a question about when and to what degree it can actually be achieved by the time it gets to that stage.
So, Councillor Briggs, then Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A few from me. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, and I support Councillor Edwin's line of questioning around this. Is our objections from a place of it's the most easiest way to process in the future, or is it kind of, to me, it's conflicting with the outcome of what we want to see achieved? And what's at the root of the objection? Is it because, and from a planning perspective, it's better if we don't need to go through this process in the future, therefore it's easier for us? Or have we gone, what's the outcome we want to achieve from a climate perspective? Therefore, it's going to be harder, but actually this is the more challenging and better outcome to be achieved. Just trying to get that clarity from you all.
So was that about policy CC1 specifically?
Correct, around the mode shift.
Our concern was chiefly about its ability to actually be implemented at the time that it happens. There are other approaches that a policy like that could take, but as written, we don't think it could achieve meaningful outcomes as it's written when it would be applied in the process.
And so would you be supportive from your professional expertise that if we were to suggest a stronger wording even than what GWRC is putting in place, so therefore it would be actually actionable and enforceable, that would be a positive way forward to achieve the outcomes that we're seeking to as a council?
I don't think it's absolutely, in my view, I don't think it's absolutely necessary to achieve those outcomes, but it would be implementable to have a stronger direction around there. And it's an option, certainly an option available to the council to ask for that, and it would be something that could be implemented in the RPS.
Great, and so finally from me, I think it's on the points that have been picked up today, if it would be possible if the planning team and the sustainability team work together maybe on that particular wording on how that's framed to make sure we are meeting our climate ambition, as well as the urgency that we're aspiring to as well. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, sorry, I've got a few as well. I'm just starting with a quite detailed one, which is CC.8, and that's to do with empowering iwi and hapu. And we've asked that the reference to hapu be deleted, and I was just wondering if that's been advised by our Tumuaki Māori and or consulted with our mana whenua partners.
We haven't consulted our mana whenua partners on that. Part of the issue with that is that it would make consulting our mana whenua partners itself more difficult, perhaps impossible, in that we would be dealing with both iwi and hapu, and either they would be repeating themselves or they would be disagreeing with each other, one of which would not be helpful and the other one which we would be not in a position to actually handle. It doesn't really fit with the partnership approach with mana whenua that we've had in the past.
Thank you. Just picking up on a bit of a theme, and I kind of read this in a similar way to Mr. Young in public comments, that although it opens up by saying we're broadly supportive, there's a whole lot of opposition voiced in there too. And I've spoken on previous submissions that we've done before that, you know, I believe we should express our opposition where we oppose things in principle, but not necessarily so much where we oppose them because they're a bit tricky or for technical reasons. And I'd just like to speak to a couple of examples. One is CC.2, which is to do with travel demand management plans. And the main point we make in there is that they're not always practical particularly for smaller developments or developments where they really shouldn't be needed. So we're requesting that policy be deleted. When I took a look at the actual GWRC proposed change, it's interesting. In the explanation, it says local suitable development thresholds are to be developed by territorial authorities. And that's kind of what we're asking for in there, I think. We're asking for it to be deleted so we can make that decision, but they explain that we would be making the decision on where a threshold lies anyway. So I just wondered if that was something that actually needed technical clarification from them rather than us opposing it.
It's not just a question of the thresholds about where it applies, but the situations where it applies as well. Often we would be considering different thresholds or no assessment at all in areas where we know that we're going to achieve good mode share outcomes by encouraging development, such as directly next to railway stations or in the city centre and other centres. The level of direction there it's providing is not helpful to provide those things in our district plan. We'd expect that we can provide much more sort of directive rules about which sorts of assessments are needed. It also does still require a blanket approach of requiring transport demand assessments when you do reach the threshold, and that threshold must be set. So it doesn't allow a case-by-case assessment about whether that level of assessment is actually reasonable. It still requires a sort of specific trigger.
And I guess one thing for me that I've seen over the years is that sometimes it's hard for us when we don't have something to hang things off. And that's where the regional policy statement becomes actually very useful to us as a council, where we can point to a regional policy statement and say, this is requiring us to do this, rather than we're trying to do it, but we've got nothing to hang it off. Do you think there's a value to these things being in a regional policy statement that actually can be helpful to us?
It's always up to the elected council of the day about what reasons they give for the decisions they make, and whether you think it's valuable to be able to say that you're implementing a direction you're getting from somewhere else, or whether you want to stand behind it sort of from first principles.
The other example I just wanted to mention briefly was CC.7, which again we're opposing. And we've written here the definition of nature-based solutions is not sufficiently clear, which again for me is just a question of asking for it to be made more clear or defined a bit better. And then it goes on to say it's unlikely that district or regional plan would fail to provide for nature-based solutions. And again, when you look to the Greater Wellington document, their explanation is that development and infrastructure planning and design should include nature-based solutions as standard practice. So it's not really about whether or not it's being prevented, it's whether or not it's becoming a standard practice.
I guess one of the other issues that the RPS has that we haven't tackled in the submission is the extent to which there are explanation reasons sections in it. Generally, panels and the courts have not given much weight, if any, to what's there in explanation and reasons. It would be to apply the policy as written, which doesn't again require that to be, imposed and doesn't require us to require that nature-based solutions be applied. It requires us to enable them. It would obviously still be entirely open to the council to then require them.
Yeah, and I think the way I read the explanation is that they want councils to make this a standard practice, but maybe they haven't explained that clearly enough in the policy itself. So I'll just leave that there. Thank you.
Councillor Briggs, Councillor Dye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just picking up which Councillor Mitchell highlighted around hapu being removed as a part of our proposal. Just want to have a comment maybe from the CE, because surely it's not up for us to kind of determine how Māori choose to organise themselves, whether at hapu or iwi level. And also bearing in mind this is a regional policy statement, and many parts of Aotearoa do organise as hapu, particularly in places like the Wairarapa. So interested in your comments, Chief Executive.
Oh, your analysis is correct, Councillor Briggs.
And then again, I know that in the current recommendations, which we'll get to shortly, is the delegation to sit with the CE to make any amendments. I just take it that would be managed appropriately as well.
Absolutely, and insofar as all things Māori are concerned, I tend not to do anything without the support of our Kaitataki Tumuaki Māori, who himself is in direct contact with our iwi leaders, and we've just been through a series of hui with all of our iwi organisations, the last one just today, and of course we have Emily involved in all of that as our Māori tikanga planner.
Thank you.
Councillor Dye.
Thank you. Obviously, the opposition through Riverlink, while largely in favour, most of the opposition was around the mode shift changes. And we've heard from the Environment Court acknowledging the gaps in these high-level documents. And we've heard from Matt Young with his involvement as a submitter. Have we spoken to our officers that have been running this process to see if they have identified any gaps in the planning documents as part of the Riverlink project? Because I think that's a really good example of, if it didn't work there, what can we do now so that in the future it works better?
In relation to the district plan, yes, but not in relation to the RPS.
And a question on a slightly different topic around Indigenous biodiversity. There's obviously a lot of comments to remove all references to that until the NPS finally comes out. Has that recommendation been given to us because that's your officer's opinion, or have you taken that stance because this council collectively has previously decided to put the NPS work on hold until the NPS comes out?
It's our recommendation based on the fact that the NPS itself is about to come out and may not be consistent with what's proposed in the RPS, and also the time frame proposed isn't practical.
And from your understanding of the NPS in the draft, you think there will be some things in this RPS that are not aligned at all with the NPS, and for that reason it's worth holding it until, Ooh. Yeah, cool. They were all my questions. I do have some feedback on other bits, but happy to do questions first.
Sorry, in relation to that last question, could you repeat the question?
I got a nod. That's all I needed. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move through into any feedback, suggestions. So we've got three options: approve the submission with or without amendments. Do not approve the submission, either prepare a new direction or not make a submission at all. So from what I'm hearing in the room, obviously we do want to approve of the submission, possibly with some amendments from what the feedback is. So I'm opening the floor for any suggestions on that. I don't want to get into an exercise of wordsmithing things. It's more just in principle, any particular changes or material changes. I think the feedback from public comment around how it is the tone at the up front can be taken away, and I think you've all got that message. But anything in particular here which we've taken a position on, it's open. Yes.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, we've also taken account of the korero so far in relation to this item. So, as much as anything, it's about tone and focus. And we obviously the delegation is to me. Should you pass it, but I will make sure that I circulate whatever I do in advance, as I normally do.
Yeah, no, that's good. And so mainly here, it's really if there's anything in here that you disagree with, or this is the time to discuss it now. So, Councillor Dye.
Yeah, it's good having that delegated authority because I think we can just stay really high level and you can get into all the nitty gritty. Three things from me. Yeah, one is that broader statement up front. This is really written as an officer's submission, which we've obviously previously done, and it's probably just been that we've taken the same template and done it, but I liken it to our submissions that we did on the MPS on Urban Development. Council did a submission, but council officers also did one, and our language and our terminology in the introduction was quite a lot different than officers' submission. So I think it's important to remember that this is the city's submission, not officers' submission. Obviously, that's happened up till now. So yeah, some of that high-level stuff about planning, I won't repeat the stuff that's said. I think you understand. Yeah, the two things I think we should be changing though is CC1, the new transport infrastructure. I don't think we should be opposing that. I think we should be providing some feedback, definitely asking for the definitions. But yeah, this is one part of the submission I don't think we should be opposing. And the second one was CC.8, which was, I don't think we should be opposing. This is regarding the ETS. And obviously the ETS is a changing thing at the moment. And the policy doesn't say that the ETS will deal with it, but it just says that in the first instances, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions over just offsetting it. So I think that is an important one that we should not oppose.
Okay, is there any, Councillor Mitchell?
Yeah, I think my earlier points have already been noted. Just with regards to the MBS for Indigenous biodiversity, I mean, our position through here is quite clear. And I agree that it could get quite complicated if the MBS comes out after this and then Greater Wellington have to go back and change things. But in a sense, that's Greater Wellington's problem in some regards. I just feel that our recommendation through here is to delete all changes regarding biodiversity, and Greater Wellington Regional Council may well read that recommendation and decide not to do it. We've got some very clear points that we've made about the timing and things like that, and inconsistencies with the national policy statement as it's currently drafted, and I just wonder if our position on that should be, and you know, happy for the recommendation to be delete those things, but if they're not deleted, that they be aligned as closely as possible with the draft MPS, Indigenous biodiversity, as it stands. So hopefully there'll be less to be undone if it comes out and it is a bit different there, because our recommendation currently is just to delete all those changes regarding biodiversity. If Greater Wellington decide not to do that, we could end up with more of a mess than if we recommend they align it more closely with the draft.
Is there any just comment from officials on that? Any?
So for the Indigenous biodiversity, again, we've raised those concerns in the submission as well, and provided alternatives. So if the changes aren't deleted, then at least the key probably is the time frame. We could put in additional material about what our concerns about the assessment criteria, which don't necessarily align with either what's been in the RPS in the past, which has driven the assessment we did for the ecology and landscapes process, or it doesn't align exactly with what's going to be in the draft NPS, or will necessarily be in the final one, and the exact details of what that assessment process is governs the work we do to do that assessment. So if it is different, then we have to do it over again.
Does that capture your
clearer,
points, Councillor?
Yeah, I think so. It's just making clear that if it's not deleted, then we want to align it closely with where the MPS is heading from what we've seen so far.
Okay. I mean, I think that would be my preference, but I'm open to other suggestions. Obviously, the option of just deleting. No, I think that's fine. Okay, so we'll take that approach. Yep. Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Without going over all that we've just covered before, I think anything that would be potentially objecting to under the current draft, because it's challenging to do so, to actually strengthen those statements so it's actually practicable to implement. And if anything, a question back to GWRC around what are the tools to be able to achieve this as well. And obviously we'll be implementing it as one of the councils, but what's the tools to actually make this operational? Because we don't want it to just be in theory or just be an aspiration. To actually achieve the outcomes, we need them to give us some direction as well in the final around how can we do this with our colleagues and other city councils as well. So if we can pass that feedback on to them, that'd be great.
Okay, I think we can note that down. Yep. Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, two final things. One, I just really want to thank officers for your time on this. This has obviously come out at a horrible timing. And I think it does need to be mentioned as well that regional council is doing this RPS change because the government has put out the MPS changes and they've got a deadline to do, but they're also the ones that are also putting out the MPS on Indigenous biodiversity, and then now it's causing all these confusions. So yeah, just really want to acknowledge your work. I know your workload is already stretched so much at the moment, and this is just another thing in there. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
A good suggestion for the submission. Thank you. No. Councillor Hislop.
Sorry, I'm a wee bit like Councillor Dye, but I actually really want to just say thanks to Matt Young, because over this last 3 years, his really intelligent and considered comments that he's made to us in relation to climate change and resilience, you know, I think he's really kept us on track at times in relation to how we're looking at things and thinking about things. And yeah, I've really been impressed with a lot of the things he's come to our meetings with over this last 3 years.
No, thank you, Councillor. Any further suggestions or comment? Okay, we'll take that away, and that will sit with you, Madam Chief Executive, and I know you'll engage us through that process. Obviously, slightly awkward timing over the next wee while, but we'll make that work as best as we possibly can. Yep. Okay. So I'll move the recommendations that are 1 through to 3, and that so agrees to delegate, number 3, agrees to delegate authority to the Chief Executive to finalise the submission consistent with discussions and any amendments made by the Council, as has been noted down. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Dyer, any discussion? Councillor Mitchell?
Yeah, just briefly, I got confused by suggestions turning into comment earlier, but I just actually wanted to comment on the proposed plan change from Greater Wellington, because I did have a good quick look at it, not as thorough as I would like to have had. It's 228 pages long, but as Matt said in public comment, there is some really exciting aspirational stuff in there that our colleagues in Greater Wellington are showing leadership on climate change and biodiversity and other issues, and certainly heading in the right direction. So I was pleased to hear our officers open by saying that they've picked up that we generally support all of that stuff, and there's some really good stuff in there. Just for me personally, part of my concern about the suggestion to delete that stuff about biodiversity is because there was some really good content in there too, particularly in the framing of how we view the natural world as a whole, holistically, rather than dealing with technical issues. However, our recommendation is that Greater Wellington really just bring that one back later. So I look forward to all that stuff being included in as well. But yeah, it was a really good document, and thank you for picking it apart for us and for your expert advice as well. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. So I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Those against, no. I declare that carried. Thank you very much. Okay, moving through to council minutes. Item 10, council meeting from the 2nd of August, page 75 to 94 of the agenda. So I'll move that the minutes of the meeting held on this date be adopted. Is there any discussion on the correctness of the minutes? No. All those in favour say aye. Those against, no. Sorry, seconder, Councillor Dyer. Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Those against, no. Declare that carried. Council meeting from the 6th of September. I'll move that the minutes be adopted. Seconder, Councillor Hislop. Oh, apology. Councillor Edwards. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against, no. Declare that carried. Item 11, which is committee minutes without recommended items. Hutt Valley Services Committee. I'd like to invite Councillor Briggs to move the noting of the minutes.
That the minutes of the Hutt Valley Services Committee meeting held on the 26th of August 2022, pages 100 to 105 of the agenda, be received and noted.
Seconder, Councillor Dyer. Yep. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against, no. Declare that carried. Audit and Risk Subcommittee from the 30th of August. So I'll move the minutes be received and noted. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Briggs, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against, no. Declare that carried. Councillor Edwards for the Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee from the 6th of September.
Thanks. I'd like to move that the minutes of the Policy, Finance Strategy Committee meeting held on 6 September 2022, pages 120 to 125 of the agenda, be adopted.
Seconder, Councillor Shaw, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Communities Committee, 7th September. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. I'd like to move the minutes of the Communities Committee meeting held on the 7th of September 2022, pages 126 to 134 of the agenda be adopted.
Seconder. Councillor Mitchell. Any discussion? Councillor Shaw.
I'd just like to add something to that. I think the Communities Committee has achieved some really positive outcomes for its residents over the past triennium. However, the COVID influence has resulted in delays for the completion of community funding grants, and it's been necessary to extend the timeframes because of this. I'd just like it noted, I really look forward to the completion of these projects that are designed by the community, for the community in a timely manner early next year.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Infrastructure and Regulatory Committee from the 13th of September. I'd like to invite Councillor Hislop.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the minutes of the Infrastructure and Regulatory Committee meeting held on the 13th of September 2022, pages 135 to 142 of the agenda be adopted.
I have a seconder, Councillor Mitchell. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against no. Declare that carried. Climate Change and Sustainability Committee, Councillor Briggs.
I move that the minutes of Committee Kaupapa of the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee meeting held on the 15th of September 2022, pages 143 to 147 of the agenda be adopted.
Seconder, Councillor Edwards. Any discussion? Councillor Briggs.
Just briefly want to again thank members as well as officers for this training and taking on this committee, and also the reflections that were shared at the committee meeting. It's really important that post-Saturday, whoever the council is continues to work in the climate space and take climate action, and that lens across all of our work as a council in the city.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay, moving through to the Ceiling Authority, which is on page 148 of the agenda. Does any member have a question? No. So I'll move 1 through to 3. Any seconder, Councillor Hislop. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. I declare that carried. Moving through to item 13, which is questions. I've received no questions. Moving through to 14, exclusion of the public. I'd like to move that the public be excluded from the following parts of proceedings of this meeting, namely the Riverlink project property acquisition, council minutes from the 6th of September, Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee minutes from the 6th of September, Chief Executive's performance review for 2021-2022 and performance objectives for 22-23. So I will put the motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dyer. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Thank you, everyone. And before I officially close the public part of the meeting, I just want to give a special acknowledgement to all of the members of the public who have engaged with us in our committee meetings, our long-term plans, our annual plans, our engagements and consultations. Those who will be watching on live stream, it's been absolutely a pleasure to be able to work alongside our residents and communities. And as you mentioned, Councillor Hislop before, with reference to Matt, we've had some really fantastic contributions around the table on a range of issues over the past 3 years, and long may that continue, particularly as we get out of COVID and we're able to do more of that on some pretty exciting and important projects and initiatives in our city as well. So I will declare the public part of the meeting closed at 3:14 p.m. Thank you, and thanks Evelyn. Thank you for being here. Okay, so we'll just take 5 minutes while we turn off Thanks, everyone. Okay, so moving through to the public excluded items, the first one being the Riverlink project. Thank you. And so I'd like to invite Gary, the team as well. Got everyone come up, yep, if you like. Tom, Billy, great to have you here. So I will pass it over to you, Gary. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I will do is I'll get Billy, who wrote the paper, to just go through and highlight a number of elements from it. Tom and I will then perhaps chime in with anything that we feel needs added, and we will be here to answer any questions.
Cool, thank you. So, kia ora koutou katoa. The Riverlink project partners have been presented the opportunity to purchase the site at 71 Ferrazon Street. The site is adjacent to existing sites acquired for the Riverlink project. The site, formerly Randwick Meats, provides an opportunity for development, which will allow for greater benefits of the transport network. All the project partners benefit from the acquisition, hence the contribution by the three main partners. The benefits to be realised by acquisition of the site include a shift south of the cycleway crossing, which will mitigate safety issues raised by submitters in regard to the Ferrazon Street crossing and consents, so that's a waka kotahi benefit. The cul-de-sac construction, which will provide a better strategic hierarchy network providing travel safety improvements, that's a Hutt City Council benefit. And the additional space for public transport should encourage more sustainable travel, that's a Greater Wellington benefit. Acquisition of the site will not displace any tenants, with the owners of the tenant business currently developing a hub to house their businesses. Vacant possession timeframes in the area support the occupation of the tenant businesses until their scheduled move. The acquisition is not a precedent, as all other parcels of land identified for the project have either been acquired or are in the process of being acquired by the project partners. The benefit to all the project partners justify this one-off acquisition by the combination of partnership. Council has existing budget provision, therefore we're seeking council authorisation for the Chief Executive to approve a financial contribution between $375,000 and $400,000 plus GST, if any, towards the acquisition of the site, subject to Greater Wellington Regional Council's approval of the purchase of the site at its meeting on the 6th of October 2022. Council's contribution is no greater than 1/3 of the total acquisition price. And finally, that the acquisition price is supported by an independent valuation. Thank you.
No, thank you. So I suppose, Gary, did you have any other comments?
I just wanted to make the point that across the whole project, there are well over 100 properties that have been identified within the scope of the project and are being acquired. This is the first opportunistic opportunity that the partners have considered. And as Billy has outlined, we're doing so because there are benefits to all of the parties within the project.
Yeah, I think the only thing to add to me is we've just had obviously quite a bit of debate in previous parts of the meeting about mode shift opportunities, and really the safety considerations here are the primary benefit, I think, because you're getting a better outcome for crossing, for walking and cycling, which was feedback we had during the consent process, and a better bus connection with the train station, which is going to be a real game changer for the city, I think.
No, thank you. So just to get a grasp of the extent that this purchase and solving these issues would assist or satisfy some of the submitters, particularly around those the cycleway improvements. To what just to give us an overview, to what extent would this how much of a difference would it make in their mind, do you think?
So essentially at the moment we've got the loop of the service lane connecting back into Ferrazon Street there at the moment in the current design. Removing that conflict between that intersection and all the other users in that location is the primary benefit. So you've not got a crossing right on top of an intersection between two local roads. So that's the primary benefit of it. If you compare the two drawings, I'm not sure what drawings are in the pack. You got before and after in there? Yeah. Okay. Does that make sense?
We've got the picture, I suppose, just sort of in a nutshell, like once this news is public, will they, how much of that will satisfy the issues that have been raised, just without going into all the detail around from submitters?
Yeah, in that location, we were really constrained in that we were working within the space that we had prior to now, and it wasn't a particularly optimal solution that we had there. It was a kind of a least worst solution is what we had to present, whereas with this additional land, it would actually be ticking all the boxes that they were seeking, which is no conflict between that intersection and the crossing.
So there's obviously still other aspects and other parts which are an issue, but particularly here that would resolve the issues raised.
We believe so, yeah.
Councillor Edwards?
I'm sold on just the criteria of lengthening the railway platform. Would I be right in thinking without this that you wouldn't be able to get the full length trains that say move on the Hutt Valley line onto the Melling line in the days when, well, I'm hoping there'll be a weekend service and a much better evening service on the Melling line. Is that the case, Gary? You'd be able to get full length trains with that extended platform?
I'm not across the detail to that extent, but without this additional land, there's no opportunity to extend the platform at all into the future without acquiring some land in the future. Yep. The other benefit, of course, is the additional bus parking, which will be created in the area as well. Yep.
Councillor Mitchell?
I think though, Gary, just looking at the picture, there's a bit marked as potential platform extension, but if we own the land, presumably we can extend it even further.
Well, within the constraints of what else is built around the land, that's right. Yep.
And Tom, just coming back to that crossing, is that just, what's the nature of that crossing anyway? Is it a zebra crossing, or has it got light controlled, or?
So that's a detailed design consideration, but really it's it's connecting up to the cycleway onto Wellington City essentially through that entire network improvement. So it's a real key crossing for the network because we're switching people from one side of Farrison Street to the other, and then on up the river corridor from there. So at the moment, I think it's a raised table is the proposition, and that was a matter of debate during the hearing as to whether it was light or no light, etc. So that will come out through the design process.
And sorry, I may have misheard in your opening statements, Billy, but you talked about how all the other acquisitions are kind of all in play or some of them completed. We do have this budget of 3.03 million for this year. Is this likely to be the last and kind of only acquisition out of that budget?
Certainly, we anticipate that is the last one. Yep. There is a future provision within the strategic property budget. I think that is for consideration around any parcels of land that may be exchanged for future development. But at this stage, there's no specific identified opportunities that money is tagged to. Yep.
Councillor Dye?
Yeah, the report obviously says that it's going onto the open market, but then it says we're going to use the Public Works Act to acquire the project. It gives us the reason that's what we've used for the rest of the projects, but I just wonder, is there any benefits to not going down that route and just acquiring it if they want to sell it to us?
The only real difference is around the payment of that, essentially ex gratia payment of $25,000. Yep. Which in the scheme of the overall project and even in the total of this purchase is pretty minor. Yep.
But in terms of the price that we're actually going to pay for it, it'll be based off the independent valuation as opposed to it going listed on Trade Me and we're fighting everyone against it.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
And just one final question, just about the new design of the cycleway, with it having sort of when you come straight over the crossing, it seems to just be a sharp 90-degree corner. Is this just sort of high-level concept drawings on a map, literally, or will it literally be quite a narrow 90-degree sharp turn to get off the road?
That will be a point of feedback we'll hear from the cyclists. So we've got a project design liaison group that we're trying to set up with them at the moment, and that's the sort of thing that they will be wanting to input to. But what you see here is not a fixed design, it's just a concept to see how it might look with that space. But yeah, we'll want to smooth that out.
Cool. And just one final thing where it talks about potential platform and potential space. Are these things that will be considered as part of Riverlink now, or just potential in the future? If we own the land, we could do these things, or will we be building the rail platform now at this full length, or could be a future consideration?
That would probably be a question for our other project partners, because I think what we're looking to commit to here is a contribution to the property acquisition, not any capital works. So there's no follow-on obligation there. So all the capital works in that location are currently funded by other partners. So if they've got the budget available and that fits with their objectives, then I'm sure they'll be looking to do that, and we can be putting pressure on for that. But yeah, it's not our budget, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that's we've gone through it pretty well. So we'll go to the recommendations, and I'd like to move that we do accept the recommendations as they are in front of us, which is 1 through to 6. Which is authorising the Chief Executive to approve a financial contribution towards the acquisition of 71 Barrison Street, expected to be in the range of 375 to 400,000, subject to GWRC approving the purchase of the site at its meeting on the 6th of October, and Council's contribution is no greater than 1/3 of the total acquisition price, and 3, the acquisition price is supported by an independent valuation. So do I have a seconder? Councillor Hislop. Any discussion on that? Councillor Briggs.
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, thank you, officers, for bringing this to us as an opportunity. I think it's logical, it makes sense, and it will enhance the total project of Riverlink, as well as hopefully overcoming some of the challenges that have been raised by objectors during the process so far.
You have a comment, Councillor Hislop?
Yeah, I just want to add that being able to do these things that are going to improve what is already an amazing project, and the biggest one that's going to ever be probably completed in the Hutt Valley for a number of years, it is the right thing to do. And it is great to see that after such a long time, this is over the line and it's going to be real and starting soon. So yeah, well done everyone.
Great. Any other comments? I did just also note that going through this in the pre-agenda meeting, I did ask around sort of precedent and our involvement in purchasing the site. And it's clear that this doesn't set any particular precedent. It is an opportunity, which we have the option of, as would be in any situation. But also clearly, if we weren't to participate, it would risk a pretty significant opportunity in the scheme of the larger project, but also could cost us one, it may not go ahead, but then also if it did, it could cost us in the long run anyway, in trying to fix things up later. So thank you for those additions in the report and making it very clear. So it has been moved and seconded. We'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Those against, no. I declare that carried. Thank you. Appreciate it. Good work. Council minutes, item 16, page 21. I will move the minutes from the 6th of September that they be adopted. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Briggs, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against, no. Declare that carried. Committee minutes without recommended items. Councillor Edwards, Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee.
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendations on page 25 relating to the funding agreement. Do you want? You don't want me to read them all out, do you?
No. So any discussion on the correctness? Seconder, Councillor Mitchell. Oh, actually, Councillor Shaw. Yeah, Justin. No, oh, sorry, Councillor Dyer.
Sorry, point of order, just, are we moving the adoption of the minutes or moving the item?
Oh, apologies.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. This is just the minutes at this stage.
I was going to say, yeah.
So if you move, yeah. So
So I'm moving the adoption of the minutes, yeah.
seconded by councillor Shaw. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay. Yeah, the item was, yeah, that's right. So we don't need to do anything else further than that. Okay, so now I'd just like to ask that we just have the Kate remain and also the Head of Democratic Services, so Catherine. Is she going to come along? So we'll take a 5-minute recess and then come back. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.